And now Dr. Tim McKnight, and hey, good morning, first of all. It's good to see
morning.
you.
Thank you. You too.
Through the fog you got here.
Yeah.
And you gave us quite a quiz this morning. Can you want to go through that, or do you want me to?
And you still don't have the answer.
Well, I had a ballpark answer, but we're talking about a devastating disease that 50% of Americans have, but is completely reversible and linked to heart disease, cancer, arthritis, ED, obesity, diabetes, dementia, infertility, and even more.
Even more like migraine headaches and loss of muscle.
Loss of muscle.
Even loss of muscle can be attributed to this condition. And we know that 40% of men have low testosterone and 10% of women are infertile, and that's also linked to this problem. And it's going to get worse before it gets better, and the problem is too much insulin. Hyperinsulinemia. So when we talk about diabetes, everybody talks about, well, what's your blood sugar? Well, the blood sugar is not really the focus. We've been misdirected in trying to understand the physiology of diabetes. The problem with diabetes in type 1 diabetics is no insulin, and the problem in type 2 diabetes is too much insulin, but it doesn't work. So any stimulus that you receive over and over again, eventually the body will stop responding, just like in a drug addiction or alcohol addiction. Same kind of thing. So risk factors for insulin resistant would be things like belly fat. If you've got a little belly and you've got either high triglycerides or high blood pressure, or you've had gestational diabetes, low testosterone, if you have two of those risk factors, you probably have insulin resistance. Okay, so let me read those again. Belly fat, hypertension, high triglycerides, polycystic ovarian syndrome in women, gestational diabetes, low testosterone. Another really interesting one that I think this might be really useful for people is if you look at your neck, around your neck, if you have skin tags or little bumps on your skin, on your face or around your neck, that's also an indicator. Some people who have early onset diabetes, insulin resistant, especially in polycystic ovarian syndrome, they'll have patches, these velvety dark patches on the back of their neck and in their armpits. And that's a sign of insulin resistance. Interesting also that you can have insulin resistance for decades before you become diabetic. So if you eat the wrong foods, eventually it's likely to catch up with you. And we see this sometimes in the hospital. We have 80-year-olds that are new onset diabetes and never thought they would become that. But the diet over time will lead to that. So again, the perception on diabetes has been focus on glucose. Yeah. And that's really an error. It really is a problem with insulin. So a couple of things that I also thought was interesting. We don't want to have these insulin spikes through the day. And most of us will get up and have a bowl of cereal or a bagel or toast for breakfast. So that's going to spike your insulin. And then you're hungry at maybe 10 o'clock. You might have a granola bar and a Diet Coke. The granola bar is going to spike your insulin. Then you have a sandwich for lunch, spikes your insulin. Then you have potatoes and rolls for dinner, spikes your insulin. Maybe you have a Pepsi or something with that. So all these things that spike your insulin are cumulative, and they cause all of these conditions. So here's a couple of 3 conditions that people might not be aware of, but I think are really important because it empowers us with how to prevent these issues. So first of all, insulin resistance and heart disease. We know that if you're moderately overweight and you have hypertension, you are likely to be insulin resistant. Also interesting is that when you become insulin resistant, you develop the muscles in your heart become damaged and the walls get thicker, and it leads to a condition called cardiomyopathy, which eventually turns into congestive heart failure. So even insulin resistance, high insulin levels, even injures the heart muscle. And it injures many things. One of the other points I want to make about heart disease is we always focus on the bad cholesterol, the LDL. There's absolutely no correlation with heart disease and LDL cholesterol. We always treat that because we can get that number down. But there's no good evidence that prevents heart attacks. We think that it does, but it doesn't. The problem is that insulin resistance is really if you have high insulin levels, your risk of heart disease goes up 40 times.
Wow.
40 times. So, we need to be looking for these things like skin tags on our neck, high blood pressure, belly fat. All those things can tell us we may be heading down the road of a heart attack when we thought we had no risk factors, no family history, and then boom, it happens. Another really interesting disease linked to insulin resistance is Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is kind of a new concept, but in Alzheimer's disease, some scientists have labeled it type 3 diabetes. So if I were to ask you, what's the most predictive indicator of developing Alzheimer's disease? Well, we know if there's a strong family history, a first-degree relative, second-degree relative, that really ups the ante for your risk of Alzheimer's disease. The second most predictive condition for Alzheimer's disease is high fasting insulin levels or insulin resistance. The third is aging, getting older. So there we have, holy cow, my grandmother had terrible Alzheimer's disease. She probably had insulin resistance. So, and that comes because the brain cannot correctly utilize insulin. Brain cells love to burn glucose, and if you can't get glucose into the cell because you're insulin resistant, then the brain cells become injured, they become damaged, they don't function well, and it puts you at risk for Alzheimer's disease.
So as you get older, your capacity to do that is less naturally anyway then.
Right. And so there are things like, and I'll talk about some of the things that reverse this, but one of them I'll just tell you right off the bat is achieving an ideal body weight. 2 is exercise, because both of those things help you to become more insulin sensitive. And then the final condition linked to insulin resistance is obesity. And many people know that there's a correlation there. But one of the things that I learned recently about this is there's 2 types of fat. I knew this. There's white fat, which is what most of us have wherever we look, and there we see fat. But there's also brown fat. Brown fat is very highly metabolic. It's very metabolically active. Babies have a lot of brown fat, and with that high metabolic activity, it generates heat. So babies would lose their body temperature, or their body temperature will become similar to the environment around, because if they can't, their surface area to body weight is very high, so they can lose heat very quickly. So they generate that heat to keep their body temperature stable by burning brown fat. So here's what we know: if we give someone insulin, a normal person insulin, they're going to gain fat. They're going to get fat. Crazy. If you become insulin resistant, which is the same kind of concept, the brown fat that you have turns to white fat, and white fat's very slow metabolically, and it slows metabolism, and that's one of the reasons it's so hard to lose weight. So we really don't want to be insulin resistant, because it really puts us at risk for developing becoming more obese, more overweight. So how do we fix this?
Yeah.
Right? That's the key. How do we reverse this? Well, lifestyle can cause disease or it can reverse disease. That's been my message forever. So the one thing that, if we talk about, we all know that exercise is important. We need to get our heart rate up. Building muscle helps to burn fat, so we should be doing some kind of weight-resistant exercises to make the muscles nice and toned, and then we need to do cardiovascular fitness to get the heart rate up, the metabolic rate up. We've talked about that before. Exercise, especially when you're breathing heavy, causes you to make more mitochondria. Mitochondria burn fat very effectively, raises your resting metabolism, so you're generating heat, and you're burning a lot of energy just by sitting, because you have more mitochondria. But when it comes to diet, there's only 3 choices. The macronutrients, it's either carbohydrates, proteins, or fats, right? So the key is to reduce the carbohydrates, especially sugars. We have to get rid of sugars. And so when we talk about carbohydrates, if we're not eating sugars and we're not eating bread and pasta, which are also, they feed this high insulin level, what are you going to eat?
Yeah.
Well, there's good carbohydrates, vegetables and fruits, particularly the berry family of fruits. They have a low glycemic index, or a low likelihood of raising insulin. So any berries are going to be good. There's some fruits that have more sugar in them, like apples and pears and watermelon, bananas. We have to be careful of those, but we can still have those. But then other good carbohydrates are beans and peas and lentils. Zucchini would be good. So there are some that are definitely good. We have to really be careful with potatoes and rice and bread and noodles.
I can already predict you're going to get like 12 bags of zucchini, but go ahead.
Yeah, so we have to find a good way to make it, tasty. And then what we have to avoid are sugars and sweets. Fruit juices and even smoothies tend to be high in sugar. So we got to be careful of that. What we need to eat more on or focus more on is protein. And most people have heard, some people have heard that protein is bad. And there are books and experts out there that say, it causes heart disease. But we know that as you age, you need more protein to maintain your muscle mass, and muscle burns fat. So we need good protein. And we get proteins in beans and lentils. We get it in nuts and seeds. And then we get it in animal sources. So, poultry, eggs, and red meats. But they should be lean red meats as much as possible. And then the real important point to make here is that fats is the other macronutrient. Most people have been scared to eat fats. Mm-hmm. Fats are excellent.
Yeah.
They don't raise their insulin. In fact, if you look at the insulin response, any carbohydrate is going to raise the insulin. Protein does a very small amount of stimulating insulin, and fat has no insulin response. So fats make us feel satiated, make us feel full, and they're tasty. So the healthy fats are things like coconut oil and butter and olive oil, avocados, and the fats you get in nuts and seeds. So we shouldn't be afraid of those foods. So I think that's those are the points I want to make, is that all these diseases that we worry about, many of these diseases, even arthritis, have a association with sugar, with insulin. Mm-hmm. You got arthritis pain, I guarantee you, if you cut the sugars out of your diet, get some of the belly fat off, your joints are going to feel better. Guarantee you. I've seen it happen over and over again. We see it all the time in Fit for Life. Men who have low testosterone, or they have erectile dysfunction and they want testosterone replacement. I've seen this over and over again. If they're morbidly obese or obese, they will not feel the effect of the testosterone, because the more body fat you have, the more you convert testosterone to estrogen, and it never does what it's supposed to do because your body converts it.
Yeah.
So we come back to trying to achieve an ideal body weight. But if you're trying to do that, you got to cut the carbs out of your diet. And then intermittent fasting is another way to really lower insulin levels. So what I often do is I will check a fasting insulin level on patients. And if it's less than 5, I don't even have to have a conversation with them about their diet. I'm like, you're doing great, aren't you? You're not eating carbs because it's less than 5. If it's 7 or 8, I'm like, yeah, you're kind of slipping more than you probably realize. And if it's 10 or higher, it's like you're not being honest with me or yourself. You're just eating too many carbs. And some people have more brown fat. Skinny people have more brown fat. They can get away with that.
Yeah.
But at some point, it's likely to catch up. And you'll see skinny people that have these little bellies. Well, they're developing insulin resistance. They just don't realize it. And they often don't worry about it because they're only 20 pounds above their high school weight. Mm. And, it's not a big deal. But, we do see skinny people with heart disease. So we got to be careful with that because really insulin resistance is at the core. And there's a lot of inflammation that goes with that. So that's why arthritis hurts more. Not really sure what the link is with migraine headaches and depression, and even some forms of I'm trying to remember the name of it's blanking here. Memory is another issue that goes with this. Autism. Some forms of autism can be linked to insulin resistance.
Let me ask you before you go, is there another Fit for Life class coming up?
There is. Coming up in the second week of September. We're filling up fast. It's amazing. We got people from other states taking the class now. People are telling their friends, and so we're filling up. But if people are interested, they can contact the hospital and ask for Kelly Bow, and she'll get you registered. And we're gonna include this information. This is fairly new information, but I've heard a lot of this before. But when I heard it like this, it really caught my attention.
Yeah. Well, we thank you for passing it along.
You're very welcome.
Dr. Tim McKnight on our Talk with the Doc this morning.